let's start. I hope everybody can hear us fine. If not, somebody let us know, but we can begin. So the way we're going to go about the session today is that we're going to start with some very quick introductions, informal. So we're not pretending to be in the interview. Afterwards, we're going to start a case. This case is going to be a McKinsey-style case. It's a case inspired by recent interviews that candidates of mine have had. So basically, we worked to create a similar structure, a similar type of exercises to basically give candidates a chance to understand how real McKinsey interviews look like. So they have a glimpse into the recent cases, not stuff from casebooks from many years ago. We will do the live case as if it was an actual interview. So it's going to take half an hour or so. And then we're going to stop, and then we're going to do feedback. So we're going to walk through each element of the case, discuss basically what worked, what didn't work, and how things could be done differently. And then at the end, we're going to have a Q&A. And that's about it. And of course, we hope you enjoy this and that it brings value to you. So without further ado, let's start. If you don't mind, Andrew, you can introduce yourself briefly, and happy to do the same after you.
Sounds great. Sure. So my name is Andrew Collins. I've just finished up a PhD in international relations through King's College London. I was looking at local ownership of peace building and specifically at the police reform sector. So some bit of a departure from management consulting, I know, but no, I find the field really interesting, and I'm looking to make the transition at the moment. So I'm over from New Zealand, where I normally live, to London for my graduation. So like I was saying before, and then yeah, so heading back in a few weeks. So it's a lot of travel at the moment. So I'm
I can imagine,
sort of in the hot seat right now, as it were. But I'll do my best.
Okay, super. I imagine also the time zones and everything, so it's probably not very easy, but yeah, I'm sure that everything will work fine. Are you originally from New Zealand?
How about that?
Or
originally from the US, actually.
Okay. Interesting. Cool. Okay, good. Well, thanks for the introduction. I am Cristian Leata. I am a former McKinsey consultant. I spent 5 years in McKinsey and then left. And now I coach candidates into consulting. I focus specifically on MBB and even more specifically on McKinsey. I've worked with about 200 candidates up until now. It's something that I really enjoy doing. I'm also very transparent with my results. So I publish basically the sanitized list in terms of names of all the candidates that I've worked with every year to show where each of them got jobs. I think it's something fair to do to candidates. And I really like working with people who have a growth mindset and who really want to get better. And to me, this is absolutely the only thing that people have to have in order to get into consulting. I don't think you need to have like great intrinsics, be great at maths, be great at structuring, whatever. I think everything is coachable. The only thing that is very difficult to coach is ambition in people or the desire to get better. And that's about it. Cool. Let's start. So,
sounds good.
Andrew, if you are ready, let me provide you with the prompt. So we have
absolutely
university today, funnily enough, for you. I thought this might be a fun example. So we're working with a university. See, at least we're giving you all the possible advantages. So you can't claim that, it was the time zones that affected your performance. You also have classes here. So we have a university that's called Russell University. It's located in the UK. It's one of the oldest and most prestigious universities in the world. And they've been educating students for more than 2 centuries. And they provide a variety of graduate and undergraduate STEM-focused courses. Now, in an effort to increase their revenues and to expand their reach, the university has recently begun offering 3 online postgraduate qualifications. And despite the quality of teaching and the effort that they spent in developing these courses, the response from students in terms of sign-up rates have been modest. So now the executives from the university believe they're acting too slowly, since other prestigious universities, particularly in the US, have successfully leveraged their brand to offer short and affordable online courses to a variety of people. So in short, they feel like they failed figuring out what to do next and how to turn the situation around. So they now hired us to determine whether they should acquire Eduline. Eduline is a well-established platform that offers STEM-related short courses to its subscribers. And the university intends to use Eduline to offer courses on a subscription basis and will then issue online certificates to individuals who successfully complete its courses. So you can think of this situation as something like King's College London acquires Coursera or something of this nature, maybe at a different magnitude. But basically, they're trying to grow in this space and provide online courses to people that are interested in learning more. So the first question that I have for you is the following. What factors would you evaluate to figure out whether it's a good idea for us at university to acquire Eduline?
Okay, sure. And I suppose we'll go through your questions in your time as you want to get to them. But I was wondering, would you like my initial thoughts on that, or should we sort of go into some clarifying questions and maybe discuss the companies and the business involved a little more?
You're in charge. Tell me.
Okay,
if
no,
you need
no
anything
problem.
from me.
I do have some initial thoughts. Yeah, so let me just make sure that I'm on the same page with you, that I got all that correctly before we get stuck in. So you said the client is a university called Russell University.
Yeah.
I'm going to distinguish that from the Russell Group. I'm assuming this is not meant to be.
That's actually the inspiration
university
of the name. So yeah,
okay,
it's not a specific inspiration.
It's not a specific, okay, fictitious uni. So that's fine. So that's the client, and they're looking, basically their goal is to grow and increase their reach, you were saying, but they've thought about doing this through a particular mechanism, which was to acquire or to found 3 new postgraduate courses.
They basically tried to develop these capabilities in-house. And this was their hypothesis up until now.
Right.
And it didn't work out.
And they're thinking that's because they're sort of too slow as compared to their US competitors, and the online offerings that they've been giving have been more sort of what the market wants.
That's another hypothesis. Okay. So it could be the reason. Realistically speaking, they also don't have clarity over what went wrong, which is why we're here in the first place.
That makes a lot of sense. All right. And so then the question is, should we acquire this Eduline offering? So the factors I would look at basically in terms of...
Sorry, maybe I think there's also a bit of lag on the line. I didn't mean to cut in, but what we're trying to figure out is, what would you look at? What are the factors that you would consider in order to be able to tell them whether this is a good idea or not?
Sure. So the factors I would really be looking at in terms of, I guess, whether to acquire something are, first of all, whether this is actually an attractive space. So you might say, is the market something that we want to be involved in? Do you really want this STEM focus for your university? And if it's already decided that that's a yes, you'd be looking at whether the company Eduline itself is attractive. Is it, does it have good standalone value? And then, after that, would it work well with our own existing offerings at Russell? So would there be synergies or dyssynergies? And if everything's green-lit, if it's all sort of looking good, then how do we do it? Do we have the finances to put this together, and what's going to be the implementation plan?
Yeah.
So that's sort of the main areas I would consider in the order in which I want to go through them.
Cool. Feel free to go into more detail into each of them.
Okay, so in terms of the assessing whether the market itself is a space that we want to be in, can you tell me a little bit more about Russell University and how you said they have a STEM focus? Is that all they're offering?
No, not exclusively. It's just their focus. Like Imperial College,
that's what
London is also known more for sciences, maths, and so on, and less for literature. In that sense,
right. So that's their specialization. That's unlikely to change overnight. That's taken a long time to build up. You said they've been in business for centuries. So let's leave that alone. Let's say that the market is a space that they want to be in. I'm going to make that as an assumption, and just correct me if I'm wrong about that. But I'm assuming that they do want to be in this online market and focused on the STEM offerings. So
I honestly
Well, you
wouldn't
don't seem too
necessarily
happy.
take it.
All right.
Yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to say that I wouldn't necessarily take it as an assumption. I think realistically speaking, the client might also think that this is a good idea, but it's our responsibility also to challenge this assumption. So um, this has to do with objective setting. What are we trying to solve in the first place? So if you have questions that you would like to ask the client about that, feel free to do so.
All right. Well, let's sort of transition into that, because I do have some thoughts about a few clarifying questions that might help to kind of crystallize what this project would look like. So in terms of the university's core goal here, you said it was to expand their reach. Does that mean expanding student numbers specifically?
Yeah, they basically want to work with more students. They also want to increase their revenues. They also want to consolidate their position in the market.
Okay.
They also feel like there's a trend around online education, and they want to jump on board. So multiple things. But I think what would be important now and what would be helpful is if you would take some time, you're not expected to answer on the spot, and try to come up with a sort of overarching structure or process to basically address this question, with the main questions or things that you would want to understand under each of them.
Okay, I can do that. If you have a minute or two, and I can put some thoughts together.
There's no rush.
That's perfect.
There's nobody watching.
Is there not? I haven't checked.
Good. Let's give it a go. Let's see what you have.
Sure. We can make a start with this already. I'm just going a few levels deeper with my analysis here. So, like I was saying before, I sort of think it's a good idea to look at these four issues, these four factors overall, in terms of whether we think that the market that Eduline is kind of competing in is actually a good one, whether we want a piece of that pie. Secondly, I want to look at Eduline itself and find out a little bit more about their current offerings, their position in the market, maybe what the competitive landscape is like and the external factors, as well as the internal dynamics of that company and their offerings there. So within the internal factors, I'm looking at sort of their existing base, the customers, and sort of the quantity that they're selling of online courses, and then the prices that they typically charge, and whether those match up to Russell University's expectations for what they would want to charge, which is a good segue into whether there are synergies or dyssynergies with the offerings already in place from Russell University. So if this is, I'm guessing the thing with education online is that it's sort of generally pitched at a lower price point than traditional university lectures. And you said there were short courses. They're focused on a lot more, I guess, moralized learning. So if that's correct, then it looks like they're almost sort of targeting a different demographic in a way. So I would want to look at whether that synergizes well with the positioning that Russell University is looking for as a leading research university. And so within that as well, I want to look at how to specifically translate between lecture format that a lot of the current faculty would be used to and these online offerings. Excuse me. And we can go into maybe more of the micro level dynamics about what that would take. And then fourthly, the fourth factor I would want to look at after the market, the company itself, the synergies would be, how do we pull this together? How do we integrate it with our current offerings, and what would be the rollout of this? So those would be the factors I would consider before wanting to make a recommendation on whether this is a compatible or desirable offering from Russell's perspective. I kind of want to touch base with you and find out how that sounds so far.
Yeah, that sounds really good. It's a nice starting point. As a next step, let me share with you some additional data that we have on the market. Assume that now our client is more convinced that they would want to acquire Eduline. And as a consequence of this, they want to figure out how much they should be willing to pay in order to acquire Eduline. And I have a few numbers that I want to share with you so that we figure out what the number is. Yeah. So we know that Eduline has an estimated number of 150,000 monthly paying users. And we expect that our brand will grow the user base by 20% year on year. We also know that
when you say multi-paying, Oh, can I just stop you there? What's a multi-paying user?
Monthly paying users,
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misheard. Thanks.
basically subscribers. Yeah.
Yep.
And the cost of integrating the platform with our existing digital infrastructure is going to be 40 million pounds as a sort of upfront cost. And then there's an additional cost of 500,000 pounds per month to maintain the platform and to create new and engaging materials. So what we want to figure out is the following. What is the maximum value that Russell University could pay for Eduline and still recover their investment in 3 years? And of course, feel free to take some time for that. Once again, you're not expected to answer on the spot, but also ask me if you have any questions about how to, or maybe if there's anything around the data that's unclear.
Yep, and just to make sure I got the data correctly, so you said they have 150,000 monthly users. They were looking at an upfront cost of 40 million British pounds, and then £500,000 per month to run this thing.
Yeah, the 40 million pounds are an upfront cost, so they'll only appear once. It's rather about integrating the IT systems, and we're looking at this over a 3-year timeline. So we want to figure out what is the maximum value that they should be willing to pay.
And they don't know the price charged to the monthly users?
Yes, that's a good question. We're basically charging them £30.
£30 per month. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So that sounds like a fairly straightforward calculation. What I was planning to do actually is basically figure out what the break-even point is going to be after 3 years. So if we can reach that, then it sounds like that is an affordable, viable financial proposition.
Fair enough.
Otherwise not. So in order to do that, what I'm proposing is I'm going to multiply the £30 per month by the 150,000 monthly users. And that's going to give us an amount of income per month that we have to compare with the costs, which are going to be £500,000 per month. And then 40 million prorated across the 3 years, so 36 months. So 40 million pounds. I'm just breaking that down into the 3-year period, so we can have a single unit of comparison. And then if the revenues from the monthly users are greater than the amount of costs altogether, then that sounds like a green light.
Directionally, it sounds right.
I can break it down differently.
What you're saying. So the point would be to look at this over a 3-year period. And we would want to figure out what are the associated revenues in this period, and also what are the associated costs. And for them to break even in 3 years, it means that the profit would have to be 0 over these 3 years. So it would mean that whatever is left as a difference between revenue and cost is what they should be willing to pay. So I'd rather look at it this way. Does that make sense?
I see. It does. I'm not 100% sure I agree with that approach, but I don't want to argue too much about it. The only thought I had on that was sort of looking at the customer as the end user, the student as the end user, and trying to sort of articulate what the core value proposition of Eduline would be. So we would have some space and this would give us a range within which to do some pricing discussions. So, but that's another approach. We don't have to take that. So you're sort of basically looking at how much
Let's
can
give
we
it a go.
exceed it by.
Let's see where it goes.
That thing I suggested? Okay. Sure. So, well, let's start with the calculations then. So let's see, 30 times 150,000 monthly users is going to give us 4.5 million to work with. So, and then let's just subtract from that. I don't want to mess with dividing 40 by 36 months. So let's just subtract 40 million from the 450. Wait a second. 4.5 million. Something's going wrong here. We have 36 months of this, don't we? One
but
moment,
basically you have £30 per month from each subscriber. You have 150,000 subscribers, and then you have a monthly cost of 500,000 for maintenance, content development, and so on. And then you have a 40 million cost, which is only one. So you can just look at it over the 3-year period.
Okay. Right. So that looks like we've got 1,080 pounds coming in per customer per month, sort of over the 3-year period. So that's going to be 1,080 times 150,000. Give me a minute, I'll work that out. So I'm getting 160, sorry, there we go. 1.62 million.
What is 1.62 million?
That's the amount of actual revenue that we're getting from the 3-year period.
That sounds like it's rather on the low end. So did you take into account that we have 12 months in a year?
Yeah, exactly. Let me redo this 1 second.
Yeah. But let's do the following. So let's take a step back here and let's just look at the first year. So in the first year, you know that you have 150,000 users, and then you're charging them 30 pounds per month, and they're 12 months. So you just need to calculate the product of this.
Of 12, 30, and 150,000.
Yeah.
Right. 1 sec. $36 by 1.5 million.
Let me know if you're having trouble. I'm happy to help.
I think it's just a basic sum. So I'm looking at, I've got it basically to 1.5 million times 36 is what we're looking at. Yes.
Yeah.
1 second.
It's okay. Let me help you this time. So it's 54 million pounds. Yeah. And then
that's what I'm looking at, but that sounds like it's not enough per year to cover the actual. Go ahead. The amount of costs that this would be associated with. But there's 3 years, right?
Exactly. So I think it's actually quite good that it looks already like the first year will be able to cover the upfront cost.
Okay.
Let's look at the next year. So we have year 2 and year 3, and we know that each year will be a 20% increase on the previous one. So feel free to calculate what would be the revenue associated with each year.
Oh, I see. So each year you're making 20% more than the last year?
Yeah.
Okay, so then the second year should be 1.2 times 54. So 64.8 in the second year million. So 64.8 million.
That's right.
For the second year plus the 54 from the first one. Yeah. And then the third year is going to be 20% based on that. So compounding.
Yeah. So it's going to be 77.8 million the third year.
Yep, that's what I'm getting here. So, okay, so 8. 15.
So what's the total?
So we're looking at 156.6 million.
Over the 3 years?
Sorry, someone's calling me. One sec. Over the 3 years, yeah, that's 3 years, 156.6 million.
Okay, but we have 54 million in the first year, and then we have 64.8 in the second. So that's already like 118.8. And then we have another 77.8. So then it's likely to be over 150.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, sorry, I got interrupted in the midst of this. So 6. I see. So it's actually 196.6 million, my bad.
Exactly. Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Now let's look at the cost. So how much cost do we have over this 3-year period?
Well, so you'd said 40 million upfront costs. So we're going to knock that back to 156 million from before. And then the 3-year period is 36 months worth of 500,000 per month. So 18 million. So we'll take a further 18 million off 156.6.
But why are you taking it out of 156? Why not take it
so
out
the
of
156
the
comes
196?
Because we do have to pay the upfront cost.
Yeah, that's fair. So basically we have the 196 and then you're deducting both categories of cost. So you have the upfront cost and then you have the
which I'm deducting
cost,
first.
Okay,
so I deduct the
okay.
upfront cost first to give 156.6. Which and that was the figure I was saying before by mistake. So 156.6 minus the recurring costs, so the ongoing cost of 18 million over the 3-year period. So that's going to be 138.6 million.
Good.
But that's what's left over to work with. That's the sort of ceiling, if you will, on a price that Russell could pay for this this platform. Sorry, it's a platform, Eduline? Yeah. Okay, so that's the ceiling in terms of how we can do it. And that's sort of the fourth category of consideration of, do we have the financing? How do we implement this? That was sort of skipping ahead to the final phase of whether we would actually be able to put this together. So if we're focusing on this for the moment, let's say that's the most that we could pay. And then what you sort of want to compare that with, if we're looking at the value proposition to the end user, is how much do the students actually get out of that in terms of value? Do we have any data about the associated career trajectories that people find after taking these courses? And we can express that in monetary terms as well.
Unfortunately not. So this could be something that you're looking at, but realistically speaking, for now, they would just want to understand from a financial perspective what should be their maximum willingness to pay, and we've managed to get to it. So thanks a lot for that. Sure. Let me now share with you the exhibit that I wanted to show you earlier.
Absolutely.
Now I can do so. So this is an exhibit that gives us a glimpse into the market. So we basically have an understanding of what the market looks like. And I just want you to take some time and then share with me what are the main insights from this exhibit.
Right, let's see what we're looking at here. So this looks like a comparison of the online and traditional physical enrollments that we've got through these different education providers. Now, sorry, along the y-axis, that's the number of students that are enrolled. So, for example, Eduline itself has over 140,000. That you said 150,000 users. Yeah, that looks about right. Okay, so then the x-axis, these different bars are the education providers. So we've got Russell in the middle there, compared on the ends with I guess 3 U.S. institutions, and we've got Eduline itself in the mix. So let's see. Now the additional information, this box down here, is talking about USA universities in aggregate by the look of it. So that's an average between Harvard, MIT, and Stanford.
Exactly. You can consider that some aggregate. Yeah.
All right. Average growth rate for the past 3 years in the online to on-campus ratio. Right. That's the physically enrolled people, the on-campus people. Those are one and the same thing. Right. Interesting. Okay, so the story it's kind of telling is a little bit confirming what they were initially suspecting, is that the
Yeah.
US institutions are much more geared towards the online world. And you've got basically a missing space in the market for Russell University. It's almost, I'd say, a negligible amount of students doing online offerings. So there's two possible interpretations to put on that, and we'd want to look into the data a bit more to find out which is more accurate. So the first is to say, well, this is a fantastic opportunity. We could add EduLine and fill in that missing gap and compare ourselves more to the US universities and resemble that profile a lot more closely. So that's one interpretation to put on this. The other is to say, well, you've actually got a US market and a British market. So geographically, there may be some differences between what people are really looking for. And Russell's built itself over centuries into this leading university, this leading education provider, and they've done it primarily through the on-campus, the physical learning method. So perhaps this is actually a reflection of what the market wants, and we need to compare sort of what would happen if you add this in to the actual demand. So what I'm thinking is we shouldn't necessarily be assuming that there is demand enough to convert Russell into something much more closely resembling a US university.
Good. So what does all of this tell us? As in, what should the client do as a consequence of this, based on, of course, the limited information that we have?
Right. So the data that we have down here, let me take a minute to digest the numbers for a second. Yeah, so the data seem to indicate that it's actually much, much more profitable to have these on campus, or let's say, more profitable to have these on campus enrollments than it is to be an online education provider. And that was sort of in step with my suggestion from before.
Sorry, one question here. What makes you think that it's more profitable?
Well, because you're looking at the price of £3,000 per year on average for a student going through the physical enrollment versus the £200 per year that you're getting from the average price of the US institutions. And EduLine itself is even cheaper. It's at £30. So I'm looking at the price points and thinking that just selling a few more.
But allow me to challenge you here. So what we see at the bottom, they're all prices for online enrollments. It just shows us that the program of Russell University that's online is significantly more expensive than that of US universities. Then actually EduLine, if you compare it with US universities, it's a bit more expensive because it's £30 per month, which is $360 per year, which is already over the US one.
This is also compared to the existing offerings within the UK of $3,000 per year. So, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and perhaps the US is a cheaper place than the UK, or a more affordable place. But it looks to me like the actual market in the UK is willing to bear the cost of this £3,000 a year for the current offerings. So adding something in that's much cheaper would be actually a very easily accommodated step, if that makes sense. I'm saying adding something much cheaper to the mix would make them even more affordable for a market that's already apparently willing to bear the higher price.
Okay, that's fair enough. I guess,
thinking.
Something else to keep in mind is also that the courses that cost $3,000 now in the UK, they are in person, whereas this is online. So of course, the profit margin might be higher in online than for doing in-person courses, but also people have a very different willingness to pay. Because if I know that I'll be going there in person, I'm a lot more willing to pay for this than some course that I'm just doing from home in my pajamas.
No, okay, this actually confuses me a little bit, because the chart down here says that, or the box down here says it's regarding online enrollments. So you say the £3,000 a year is for physical courses?
No, I mean, what you are mentioning that in the UK, by comparison, the price is $3,000 for physical courses.
But that says the average price is $3,000 for an online enrollment.
Yeah, so it's $3,000 for online enrollment for Russell University.
Into a physical, oh, okay, I got you.
No, for
Okay,
online,
yeah, that wasn't great.
for the postgrad courses. Yeah. So let's take a step back here. Basically, what this exhibit is showing us is that we have here in the bottom part of the screen, we have the prices only for online courses. So we have £200 per year for US. We have £3,000 per year for Russell University, and we have around £360 per year for Eduline. And of course, what we notice is that we're about 15 times more expensive than the US universities. So here, of course, the question is, what sort of value do we provide to convince clients to pay 15 times more than they would pay for US universities? Are there some sort of specialized courses, or why are we charging this amount? Because this could already explain why we have such a small number of signups. And then
this is sort of why I was asking for the, go ahead.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
I was just sort of thinking that this is why I was after the information about whether we can associate these courses with higher paying career trajectories in the STEM fields, for example. And if you're saying we don't have data on that, then maybe that's a direction for future research or something to look into as far as next steps go. But
that's fair.
Yeah, just at the moment, that is a pretty striking observation as well that I was noticing, is the price points were much higher in the UK.
Good. Okay. But I feel like all of this is good. Let's park this discussion. There's just one more area that I'd like to discuss with you. Let's assume that our client, after all of these discussions, they would decide to go ahead with the acquisition of Eduline. They would just want to understand upfront what is likely to go wrong. What are some of the risks they should consider? And also, what are some of the mitigating actions that they could take in order to handle these risks?
Okay, so I mean, this sort of links back to what I was saying about the two possible ways to interpret the bar graphs there. The major risk I see is that the actual market in the UK wants physical courses, doesn't want to replace those with online offerings. And so if that's the case, if there isn't the sort of demand for this type of offering, for this shape of education, then you could wind up paying quite a lot actually for something that doesn't deliver the expected amount of enrollments. So the 150,000 users from Eduline, that's based on, I guess, US precedent. That's based on a different demographic, a different segment of the student market. So, and it would be a mistake to say that American and UK students are exactly the same. They'll have different preferences, different willingness to pay, as we said. So there are a lot of potential risks around uptake. Now, if you can perhaps pilot this, or I don't know if there's a way to mitigate it by not acquiring Eduline outright, but using it for a little while as a client, and before acquiring it, just sort of testing the waters to see what the uptake would look like, and whether it's a popular offering. I think that could be a much more sensible way to kind of get a foot in the door and make a more informed decision about whether to acquire the whole thing. Because right now it's quite reliant on there being uptake similar to what you see in the US.
Good. Okay. I feel like these are fair things to consider. Let me know if you have any other questions here or any thoughts for the client. Otherwise, we can pause.
Okay, sure. So as far as, well, first of all, my question is, you had said your first question was what factors I would want to consider in terms of whether to recommend the acquisition. Did you have some other questions that you wanted to add on top of that at a macro level, or are we still sort of we've gone through subsequent questions in the interim?
No, we've covered pretty much everything we wanted to look at. I guess what would be useful if you could quickly provide a sort of synthesis for the client in terms of telling them at the end of the day, knowing what we know, the little that we know, what we believe they should do and why.
Yeah, okay. So I was taking a few notes while we went along. So my recommendation is actually at this point not to acquire Eduline outright, because it seems to me like there are quite a lot of risks, and you're making a big gamble on the UK resembling the US in some pretty significant ways. So as we said, there was sort of a potential profit of 138 million. 138.6 million pounds from doing this. But in terms of the actual goal that they had initially set out of increasing their reach, consolidating their market positioning. You had said they wanted to, yes, boost their revenues, and we can look at this as a revenue-based measure. But the 138.6 million is just a revenue figure. It's a projected revenue, and it could come true. It also may not. So we would want to, as I say, sort of test the waters a little bit more with something that potentially could give us better data about what the UK attitudes are towards this space. And then the second point about that is that those revenues actually don't speak to you're consolidating your market position or you're increasing your reach within the UK market. If you want to bring in more international students and increase your reach that way, this might be a direction to go. But we need to disaggregate the international students from the domestic ones and look again at their willingness to pay, their funding mechanisms. International fees can be very expensive and so forth. So putting it all together, what I'm suggesting is that they wait on buying this. Those projected revenues could still come true in the future. In the future, if we acquire it at a later date when it's more favorable and we know more with more certainty that the risk is manageable.
Good.
Anyway, I just don't think it speaks to the core goals, and that's my recommendation.
Cool. That makes sense. Let's pause here. Thanks a lot, Andrew. And also thank you very much for having, the courage and the openness to do this. I think this is great. How do you think it went?
I learned a lot from it. Look, I definitely needed some time to find my feet with the quantitative section. I sort of wasn't in that headspace at the time, and took some sloppy notes in the first place. So I need to practice on that a little more, obviously. But no, once we got rolling, I think it largely went in a direction I could understand. I think I would have like to get a little bit deeper in a structured sense with the sort of particular analytical categories that I was bringing to it, but I don't think those ended up being as relevant as actually the data that we saw in the exhibits. So it was good to have those as a point, and then to go from the data into recommendations based on what we do know. Yeah, good. And
if you think there would be one thing to focus on to get better, what is this thing for you?
My self-evaluation?
Yeah.
I would say just getting a little snappier with the computation of those basic numbers, and making sure that I communicate what I'm actually doing as I do it, instead of trying to note it down as I'm talking to you. So just taking a moment and making sure that I spell out what the calculations are, and then do them and report them back and check that everything's on the same level. So
cool. Okay, that makes sense.
That'll be
good. So overall, once again, thanks a lot for doing this. I feel my perception of you as a candidate is that you've done cases before. You have several things that are really good, which is the fact that I genuinely have the feeling that you're thinking through the problem. So you're really putting yourself in that situation and trying to use everything that you know in order to solve the client's problem. And that's a huge, huge advantage. I also like that you're confident, and I also like that you're remaining positive even when things don't go well. So all of these things are great assets. If there would be, actually two things high level that I think would make a huge difference to your performance. Is one regarding taking time, and second is regarding how you see the interviewer. So on the first one, in terms of taking time, I know that this is sometimes communicated on lots of platforms and guides and so on, that you would try to be as quick as possible, but speed is not something that you're really tested for. You're really tested for depth and quality. And this is how you should see this entire interview, which means that you should use time in your favor, which means that you should take time before you answer any question. Of course, I'm not talking about chit-chat questions or follow-up questions or small questions. It's just about the big questions that mark the sections. And you have that time. And not only is it good for you to take that time, it's expected of you to take that time, because it shows that you're thinking and you're trying to give a proper answer and trying to give a structured answer. And this is just a misconception that's often propagated from candidate to candidate, that you just need to do it on the spot, like the calculations or the chart interpretation, but it's not true. Like even when I was in McKinsey and would have like a room and it'll be like senior partners and partners, and it'll be a new exhibit on the screen, people will just go quiet for a minute. They want to think through it, to digest it, So then,
Sure.
of course, nobody, like candidates, not even candidates or not even senior partners, nobody has the capacity to just come up with the insights like that. Yeah. So just make sure that you take time at every step. And in terms of a guideline, take about 60 seconds or so for the first question and about 30, 40 seconds for the follow-up questions. But if you have to choose between quality and speed, always choose quality. People who are slow almost never get rejected. Like you have to be embarrassingly slow, like the interviewer goes to make themselves some tea. But people often get rejected because their answer is not deep enough, it's not good enough, they're not structured, many other reasons. But rarely is it because of time. So then to me, as an interviewer, it's always very fascinating to see that the thing that candidates focus on is being fast, when this is like one of the least important things.
Yeah, that is interesting. I felt it getting uncomfortable in the math section of calculating the revenues in that. I felt that I was taking too long with that. What would count as uncomfortable or unacceptably long to spend on these?
We'll get to the calculation question and we can dive deeper there. But from my point of view, the reason why it took long, and it did take rather on the longer side, is because you didn't take time in the right places, and then you didn't have the right technique to approach the question. So by trying to be fast, you actually created more problems for yourself. But high level, there's a second point that I wanted to mention around how you perceive the interviewer. So I like your approach in terms of like being confident and also trying to challenge the interviewer. Like you said at some point, I don't quite agree with that approach, which is sort of nice, because it shows that you're exercising the obligation of the dissent, which is one of McKinsey's values, and it shows that you have courage and so on. But it doesn't necessarily put you in a great position in the relation with the interviewer, because what the interview is trying to simulate is the interaction that you would have with the client. And if you're trying to persuade, I'm not sure whether you can still hear me because, okay, I think Andrew just dropped. Hey, Andrew. Can you hear us now? We're connecting now. Now?
I'm so sorry about that. My battery just died as we were in the midst of, but I do want to hear what you were saying about simulating the interaction with the client.
Yeah, we were just wondering whether it was because of the feedback, because we're just starting, so that's why I thought.
Yes, I don't like being criticized. No, this is the most useful stuff right here. This is fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. This is the whole point. So I was saying that what the whole interview is about is trying to simulate the interaction that you would have with the client. In order to convince somebody of something, you ideally don't confront them directly. You ideally don't tell them, I disagree with you, unless you're sort of trying to break their pattern, because they're not even interacting with you. Ideally, you persuade them differently. Yeah, you veer them more delicately in a different position. So you could have said, instead of, I don't agree with the approaches, could you tell me more? How does it differ from my approach? Let me take a minute to reflect on my approach and how yours could be integrated. So always trying to find like the common path, because it's important to see the interviewer not as a gatekeeper, but rather as a guide throughout the process, because they want you to succeed. Nobody wants to interview people who then don't get hired, because it's like a waste of time in a way. Cool. So these are the big level points. Let's go through the detailed feedback now. So we'll go through each element. We did case framework, we did calculation, we did data interpretation, brainstorming, and then we did the recommendation at the end. These are also all the 5 types of questions that exist in this interview. So for the case framework, I like that you had these investigative questions. It was relatively conversational. You had good questions that showed curiosity around the client situation. So all of this is great.
That sounds like a plus.
What I would change? Of course, these are big pluses. What I would change, take the lead instead of providing options. So you told me, should we do this or should we do that? Ideally, you either do it or you tell me, I have 2 things in mind, this and this. I suggest we do this, because it shows that you're proactive. Then play back the prompt to the interviewer before even asking questions. It's important for you because it allows you to validate the data that you have and make sure that it's right. And it's also sort of an expectation that interviewers have. So it's important to basically synthesize the context that you are given and to check that the question that you wrote down is the question that actually the interviewer wants an answer to. Because that's, once again, super important. If you don't get this right, then nothing is right. Then take time to come up with a structure. You have like a minute here. The first thing that you came up with was fine in the sense that I felt like you were thinking through the situation, you were breaking down the problem, but at the same time, it didn't come across as being structured. It didn't come across as being particularly deep or insightful or exhaustive. Yeah, so there are many other minuses that came just because you wanted to do it on the spot. The expectation is that you take about a minute of thinking time. You come up with a structure, and then you provide a presentation of 4 to 5 minutes, give or take. Yeah, it's not set in stone. It depends on the context of the client, but just as an anchoring number for you. So it's not 1 minute, it's not 15. Then the whole point is that you should aim to have a top level structure. It's called the pyramid principle. You should first have the buckets. What are the main areas that I'm looking at? And you had, I think, market, company, whatever, like several buckets. You first mention these, and then you say there are 3 areas that I'm going to look at: market, company, competition, whatever. Let me jump into the first one, on market. First of all, blah, 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 blah. Second of all, blah, 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 blah. Third of all, and so on. So you almost like double down into these things, and then you have bullet points that you talk about. And it's important in terms of shape, format to present it like this rather than present it as a list. Yeah. Then the next thing that I would say is avoid as much as possible traditional structures. Traditional structures means things like market, competition, customer, and so on. These are the structures that were presented even like years ago. They're in all these old school books, but basically now consulting firms are making an active effort to give candidates fresh new situations and fresh new questions in order to test their ability not to regurgitate structures that they've learned online. And I'm not only speaking about you, like everybody does this, or 90% of people, but to show that they're thinking on the spot, you know? So one way you could have, for example, structured this question is to, and this problem is, for example, to come up with a set of like core questions. So at the end of the day, what are you doing? You're evaluating an opportunity on behalf of a client. That's the whole mission, high level. So you could have asked 3 questions. Is this a good idea? Is this worth it? And is it worth it for our client? And let me dive deeper into each of them. So is this a good idea would mean, for example, you doing a sort of market assessment, competitor assessment, customer assessment. You're basically trying to figure out, is this online market actually a thing that is, you know, happening? Is this a trend? Are people interested in this thing? Is this potential in this market? What are the things that customers are interested in? What is our competition doing? You're trying to understand all of this ecosystem in order to be able to understand whether this thing is even something worth spending time on, is worth pursuing. If this turns out to be a yes, then you could move to the next one, which is this worth doing? Being worth doing, at least from a neoclassical point of view, profit maximizing businesses, you are asking the question, is this profitable? So then you do a financial analysis. You want to break it down into, okay, what are the revenues? What are the costs associated with this? What would be the profit? When would be able to break even, and so on. If all of this, again, turns out to be true, and for this to actually be profitable, you now learn that, okay, this is doable and this can make money. Now, the third question is it worth doing for us? Is it basically trying to figure out whether there's a good overlap between this opportunity and our current set of skills, of capabilities? Because this could be a great idea and be an idea that makes a lot of money, but for a very different university. For us, it could be a complete disaster. And this is very important specifically for this client, because once again, this is a university that has tried developing these capabilities in-house and has failed. So for them now to acquire and run an edtech company raises serious question marks, you know? So then it makes a lot of sense to actually dive deeper here and figure out whether from a capability standpoint, it makes sense to do that. Then another point,
Can I, while we're still
of course,
on this point,
please,
can I just ask some questions around that? So some of what you're saying sort of does ring true, and I like the structure that you presented and the shape that you were giving it, as you say. In some ways, I also felt like that was what I was trying to get at, and I was just sort of wondering if that came across, or if the framework that I presented was actually quite unoriginal. So when I say that was what I was trying to get at, things like when I was saying, let's look at the market and whether this is something that we actually want a piece of, that maps quite closely onto the first thing that you were
It
talking about,
does.
assessing the
It does.
customer and the competitor. This thing. And
It
so
does.
secondly, or the synergies and dyssynergies, as I was putting it, might map quite closely onto that final thing you were talking about with the, does it match for us? So that was sort of the approach that I was thinking about. Did I communicate that successfully?
No, you.
Okay, I believe you.
Yeah,
Okay,
let me just tell you why. I respect
sure.
the fact that it was a fair attempt, and once again, the whole point is to learn and figure out how to do it better. So it's normal. It's not
Yeah.
expected for you to now do these things. Yeah. So there's no issue with it. Basically, the part where it came short with this is that it wasn't structured from the beginning. I didn't understand what were these areas that we're looking at.
Okay.
So it was very difficult for me as the listener,
Okay.
interviewer, client, whatever, to follow what's the backbone of the structure. Why does it have that order? Why should we be looking at the problems in this way? Then second, from the interviewer's perspective, I felt like the structure was not original. So my instinct now, I would almost start to turn off and think, this is just another candidate that learned frameworks, because it's starting with looking at the market. So I'm almost developing a hypothesis about who you are and thinking that you're not sufficiently creative. And then content-wise, I felt like there were lots of good points. They were just not presented in the most convincing manner. And they were also not sequenced in a way that makes sense. But what I'm trying to say is that your answer on a 1 to 10 scale for me is a 6, 7. It's not a 2, but it's also not a 9, 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which
Good.
is definitely where I want to be. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
it just
I know
takes
exactly
time.
what
It's
to do about
absolutely
this
normal.
as well.
Yeah. And by the way, also happy to get connect outside of this event and go again through the feedback if you have questions. Happy to do so. There was one more point that I wanted to mention here is to always try and close the structure with what is the next area that you want to look at. And I felt like you were doing this, but you weren't doing it consistently. But ideally, you would mention what is the next thing that you'd want to look at. And this should always be the thing that is first in your structure, because the structure should represent an intrinsic prioritization of the topics. So for example, if we go on the question-based structure, which is just one way of doing it, is, now I would actually want to get an overview of the market and the competitors, and ideally an overview of customer preferences and what they look for, and this would be a starting point for the discussion. Then we had technical issues, and instead of looking at the exhibit, we looked at the calculations. On the calculations, I like that you were proactive, you remained positive, and this goes a long, long way. It's super important. And I'm also just realizing that we went over the time now for the recording, but let's just keep on going. I think it's not going to bother anybody. What I would do differently. Yeah, what I would do differently. So take the time to first come up with an approach step by step before jumping into the computation. So the way the majority of candidates approach calculation questions is that they're being given the prompt and then they feel this anxiety like they need to solve it immediately. You are not expected to solve it immediately. And even if it's a simple question, even if you're able to solve it immediately, it's not great to do so because it's very unlikely that you'll be able to solve it in a structured way. The whole objective of this calculation question is something that the majority of candidates get wrong, is that they try to be accurate and fast. This is what they're optimizing for. But what you should be optimizing for is basically to create buy-in for the approach and to co-develop it with the client. So it's the same way it would work in consulting, in the sense that what you're trying to do is not necessarily to come up with a perfect solution. That's also ideal, but it's to make sure that your solution is accepted and clearly understood, because otherwise you're going to be a consulting firm that delivers a solution that's never implemented. So the way you do that is that you first try to present the logic of how you would do it with the interviewer. You present it to them step by step, and you get them to provide feedback and maybe make changes. And only after that's done, you go to the actual calculations. So to take a step back, how you do it, I usually think about it in terms of 4 steps. The first step is to make sure that after you've been provided the data, maybe you have an exhibit, maybe you don't, it doesn't matter. play back the data, make sure that you validate it and that you know that you have the correct numbers, and even ask if you have any clarifying questions. Maybe there's a data point you don't understand. Clarify what's the question that you need to answer. Maybe again, it wasn't super clear to you. It's totally normal. Then take time. Once again, not expected to do it on the spot. And in this time, try to just come up with the logic. The logic means what are the set of steps that you need to take in order to solve the problem without the numbers. So in this particular situation, I would see it something like this. You would take time and get back and would say, thanks for the time. So let me just share with you how I think about solving this problem. So first of all, what we're trying to do is that we're trying to figure out how much they should be willing to pay in order to break even in 3 years. So break even means that profits have to be zero. So revenues have to equal cost. And the way I would do it is the following. I would first calculate the revenues. So that would mean I would multiply the current fee that they're charging, the base of customers, and the number of months in the year. And I will find this out for the first year. As a second step, I'll calculate revenues for year 2 and year 3 because they have a 20% growth rate. As a third step, I'll just sum up all the revenues, and this will give us the total revenues over the 3 years. Fourth step, I'll look into the cost, where we have the upfront element, the fixed fee for the investment, and then we have a variable fee, which is monthly. So I will aggregate all of these over the 3-month period. And then as a fifth step, I'll basically do the delta between these. I'll do the difference. And the difference is basically the maximum amount that we should be willing to pay. Because if we pay that amount, the max, then we would be left with nothing. The profits would be zero. Does this approach make sense? And the interviewer can say, yes, this sounds amazing. Or they can say, actually, why would you do that? How else could you do it? Actually, I'm thinking about doing it this way or that way, and so on. And whatever they say, the important thing is to treat it like a conversation you would have with a client. So you try to understand why they're saying that, to accept it that maybe it's a better way of doing it, and most importantly, to try to integrate it into what you're doing. So if you feel the need for it, you could also ask for more time, ask for a few more seconds, and try to reflect with pen and paper on how to merge the approaches and make them work. But anyway, once you've agreed with them and they say, yeah, let's do it, this is the way, you can then take time again, totally okay, to do the computations on your own and sanity check them. And once you know that you've arrived at the right answer, then you can get back to the interview and take them step by step through it. The same steps that you had in the logic before, but now with numbers attached to it. And there are many reasons why this is better, but the main thing is that cognitively it becomes easier because you're now siloing operations. You're not trying to do logic, computations, and communication at the same time. You're doing each of them separately, which means that you actually work faster and more accurate. But it's also because it's a lot easier for the interviewer to follow if you do it like this, you know? So then let's say that you go to the calculations and you reach the result and they confirm that the result is correct. Or maybe if it's not, then at least you have the chance to change it quickly and then recover fast. And once you have the number, you go to the last step of this 4-step process and you basically interpret the number. And you actually had a very, very good instinct with doing that and contextualizing it. And I would say go even deeper. So basically, this is a company that wants to grow, a university, educational institution, and they have a hypothesis. What you could do here as part of the interpretation is say that, look, this is the maximum amount that you should be willing to pay to break even. This is the answer to the question. However, I would also wonder whether there are other investments that we could make. Perhaps we could look into some competitors of Eduline. We could try to do a similar estimate with them and see maybe that's a better option. We could also see whether there are avenues that we could look at in terms of improving our in-house capabilities in order to not run into the same trouble that we had before or do something completely different. So maybe you don't need to be in online education. Maybe you can do something completely different. You know, I don't even know what that would be. Maybe they could something regarding branding, renting spaces, whatever it could be for them to grow revenue. You know, but it shows creative thinking. Yes, please.
I like that it shows creative thinking. What I'm wondering about with things like that is, would it be off scope or outside of scope? Because you were quite clear about the objective being, do we buy Eduline? And I wanted to stay on track.
That's a great question. That's a great question. It's off scope if you spend 80% of the time discussing these things instead of what you're actually asked about.
Yeah.
But if you spend most of the time speaking what you're asked about, but at the same time, you also start speaking about other things, it shows creative thinking, lateral thinking, because it's the same situation as with the client. You know, firms often go and start working with the client, and the client has a hypothesis. Our revenues are going down because we don't have a digital journey for our customers. We need a digital journey. And you know what good consulting firms do is that they first ask, why do you think you need to do a digital customer journey? Maybe there are many other things that are going wrong. Maybe you just have very poor customer service now, and we should first fix that, because that is a requirement for also the digital journey to work well, you know. Or maybe there are other problems. So it's very important to challenge the assumption that the client has and to show that you can think creatively and laterally in this situation. So these are some of the main points here. What I was saying before is that if you have this sort of technique, building these buffers, sequencing mentally, cognitively the operations that you have, you actually become faster and more accurate, which is kind of funny. By trying to add more time, you will become faster, but it really works. Then data interpretation. So what I liked a lot about you, let me put the exhibit back on the screen, is that you had a very good instinct to start reading the exhibit, to describe the exhibit. You should always do that. So the moment you're given an exhibit, you should start describing it. And describing it means really describing it or reading through it, not interpreting it. So you could say, the upper part of the screen, I have a bar chart. I see number of students enrolled between this year and this year. I see our client. I see the target they want to acquire. I see these other universities. You can also, as you read it, you can also ask questions. So USA universities, is that an average for them, you know, like you did? So it's very important to first know what sort of data you have at your disposal before taking time. But then once you've done that and you've asked clarifying questions, always take time. Don't do it in the interpretation immediately. The importance of taking time, but also the importance of first reading the exhibit and then taking time, is that in most cases, when you do take time, the first thing that you do is read the exhibit. But by reading it beforehand with the interviewer, you can then use your time to only digest the exhibit. So to come up with the core insights. And then try to basically, in that thinking time, come up with like 3 to 4 self-standing insights. Think of them almost like bullet points or mini paragraphs of insight. And for each of them, you should ideally aim at a data point of sorts, explain what it means, and then what the client should do as a consequence of it. So to give you one such example, we have Russell University enrolled online is around 10% of their base. By comparison, the other institutions have between 80 and 100% enrolled online. So this is just the data point. And what I did here is that I also quantified it a bit. I did something with the numbers. You don't always have to do that, but it helps. I turn them into percentages. Now, what that means is that there's definitely demand for online education in the market. And it definitely means that our client is missing out on this. Like there seems to be so much potential and we're doing nothing about it. And now what the client should do as a consequence of this. So this is the part that actually makes it insightful, is being prescriptive about it, where you tell them, so what we think you should do as a consequence of it, or you're almost like launching a hypothesis or a set of next steps, is definitely to consider buying Eduline or find some other way of entering this space, because there is so much potential. And acquiring Eduline specifically might be a good idea, because if we were to buy Eduline, so if you imagine that big orange line going on top of Russell, we would have actually a similar distribution of physically enrolled to online enrolled as some of our competitors. So it'd be great. And then we would actually be market leaders if things were to work well operationally, of course. But the point is to come up with about 3 of these insights, always mentioning data point, what it means, what the client should do. And this is a very, let's say, easy way also for the interviewer to follow through your insights.
And you could go deeper with that and talk about cannibalization or potential other risks associated with merging them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then I also noticed that we had some trouble then when we were on the lower part of the screen, because I felt like maybe there was also just confusion between the two of us. I also felt like maybe you weren't clear on some of the numbers or what the numbers represented or what was the time scale and so on. And I think these situations appear because maybe there were questions that you could have asked in the beginning to clarify the exhibit that you didn't end up asking. So that would have helped. And if it happens in the interview, you could always say, you know what, if you don't mind, let me just take another 10 seconds. I'll take a step back and I want to just go through the exhibit again. I think that's something that I hadn't noticed. And that's better rather than sort of getting stuck in this, we're a bit like when you're on the street and there's somebody coming and you go in one direction and they go in the same direction and then you change direction and they change direction. So this is how it was with the two of us. We're like, we didn't know where to go anymore. And to avoid this thing, it's best if you just decide to take a step back and do so as the candidate, not as the interviewer.
Okay.
These are the main points on the data interpretation. Maybe one more point before we move on. I just wanted to mention that what helps a lot with data interpretation is to always discuss insights in the order of magnitude. What that means, don't start discussing things that are maybe numbers or details, things like average growth rate, before you discuss the overall shape of the exhibit. So you should first start with the big things. It's almost like you try to interpret the exhibit and you just do it from like far away. And then you can't really see numbers, you can't see writing, but you can see the shape. So what I see here is that, I see a lot of orange for the other guys. I see very little orange for us, and then I have an insight. If I get closer, I already see the labels. I'm able to comment maybe on some of the prices. If I get even closer, I look even more detail, I'm able to see something else. So make sure that you present them in the order of magnitude. And that's it on data interpretation. Let me know if there are any questions before we move on to the brainstorming.
I still did have a question about that 3,000 per year for Russell University, but I think that's more of a separate conversation. We don't need to get into it.
Okay,
I think
that's no problem.
Then
happy to get into it. Yeah, happy to get into it also offline if you have questions. With the brainstorming, so I like that you were thinking through the problem once again, and you have a lot of confidence of communication. That's great. The main thing here to bear in mind is that at the end of the day, brainstorming questions and framework questions, they're exactly the same in the sense that they are structures. And if they're structures and you're expected to present content, it has to be presented first in a top-down structure, where you present the main areas, and then you deep dive into each of them. And what you did by comparison is that you tried to answer on the spot, and then you almost like started listing out risks. Content-wise, it was good. What it was missing is that it wasn't structured, it wasn't insightful, it wasn't enough. So once again, to fix all of these, the first thing that you need to do, and the most basic thing, is to just take time. And then to get back and share with the interviewer the main categories of risk. So you could have things here like financial risk, operational risk, brand risk. This could be a big thing. I mean, this is a huge university with a huge legacy, and now they're trying to work with an edtech. So there are 3-4 of these main headings, main areas that you want to look at. And then under each of them, once again, you have several bullet points that you could discuss. And the second and last point here is that if you have a question that has 2 sub-questions, try to explain the interviewer how you're going to answer the question in the first place. What I mean by that is the following. I basically asked, what are the risks and what are the mitigating actions? And what helps to do here is to first say, thanks a lot for the time. Let me just share with you first how I'm planning on approaching this question. I will first want to list out or present to you all the risks. And then after we're done, I will present to you all the mitigating actions that I have in mind. Or the way I'm looking at this is that I will present the risk and immediately the mitigating action that I see for it. So it's important to once again give the interview like the backbone of how the answer itself is going to be structured so that they know what to expect. And then, of course, you would have the bullet points under each of them. Brainstorming answers shouldn't be as deep or long or broad as frameworks, like the upfront framework. But, you should still have quite a bit of content there, and you should aim to be as meaty as possible in terms of being collectively exhaustive, mutually exclusive. I'll pause here on the content. Let me know if there's anything else that if you have
Yeah, no,
any
this is
questions.
really good. I think I stopped after one risk and the mitigating idea.
Yeah,
I think that, yeah, probably should have gone on for a little longer and been
yeah,
organized in the same. I like the idea of structuring even the brainstorming up front.
yeah,
I didn't realize format wise that we were able to sort of take those pauses and say, can
yeah,
I go silent for another minute or something and work out
yes,
another
yeah,
structured approach to it.
for sure. So
That seems
throughout
quite
this entire thing,
luxurious, quite spacious.
yeah, yeah, it is. Like time is your friend.
Okay.
Take time. I've worked with so many candidates up until now, and the majority of them are at first like surprised by this because it's just like in so many books and so many other candidates say that you need to do it fast. But once they change this methodology, then things become a lot easier. And then I've never heard of a candidate of mine receiving the feedback that they were too slow. Like it never
Okay.
happens, because the thing is that it's almost like when you learn a sport or you learn anything new, it's important to first do things slowly and learn correct technique, like with swimming, rather than trying to go very fast. Because if you do things
Mhm.
slowly and learn correct technique, speed will sort of take care of itself with time. So it's just
Speed will
important
come.
to
Okay.
focus on quality rather than speed. Two last points I wanted to mention. One on the recommendation. Once again, I like how you were thinking through it. I like that you're not using any sort of templates or anything. It's good. Maybe do as a suggestion of a template. Usually for recommendations, you'd want to state what the main question was that you're trying to
Yeah.
solve in the case, what they should do. So upfront
Upfront.
recommendation,
Mhm.
2-3 supporting reasons, so arguments. Then you'd maybe want to mention the core risk. And then the next step, which is usually either about how to manage for that risk, or it's a procedural step in terms of how to make it all happen, this project. And aside from
Okay.
this, in terms of the delivery, I just wanted to say that you're a very nice guy. You seem very friendly and easy to engage with. And your tone
You
of
too.
speech is very clear. And it's easy to build rapport with you. So all of these things would be huge plus in the
Appreciate that.
interview. And that's about it. That's all I have to say. And sorry for going so long over time. But
I'm glad you did. This is helpful.
cool. Let me know if you have any other questions.
Sure. Well, I mean, let's be in touch offline, and I have plenty more questions, but I don't know how long the YouTube audience wants to stick around for, or the M Consulting Prep guys.
Yeah.
But no, I'd be happy to get into it a little more with you if you're willing later on.
Yeah. Well, you have my email
I
address,
do have
so
one
feel free
last.
to reach out. Tell me.
Exactly. I think I know the answer to this, but I do have one last question that I think might be useful for everybody. Am I correct in assuming the direction of your recommendation, yes or no, is not super important? Just the way you defend it.
That's a great question. It's not important. It's
Okay.
important only to an extent to which the recommendation would be sort of obvious and you go in the other direction. But
Right. Sanity check it, but don't. Okay.
this whole interview is not about being right. It's rather about
That's a relief.
knowing how to engage with the interviewer and co-create with them the same way you would do with the client. So it's a mindset thing. And second, it's about how you present yourself and your way of thinking in this process. So how you think through the problem, but it's not important whether the result is 1 or 15 or 25, as long as you're reasonable with the rest of the stuff. Of course, with calculation questions, ideally you get the number right. But,
Sure.
with the rest of the stuff, it's more important how you do it rather than specifically whether it's that thing, because they're testing for your skills. They're not testing for your knowledge. So funnily enough, you're a guy who spent time in academia. We had a case from academia today, but it could have been something from biochemicals. And then I couldn't have had the expectation that you know stuff from biochemicals.
And I don't even know if it helped me all that much, to be honest, to have this as a university situation. I don't think that was ended up being too relevant.
Cool. Well, it was really nice meeting you, Andrew. And thanks a lot.
You as well. I'm glad we got to do this.
For organizing this. And thanks for everybody who was bearing with us up until now. Hope you have a nice day and catch you soon. Ciao.
Take care.